Chapter 2, Louisa. Never had a stretch of highway seemed so bleak. 4.5 hours had passed since my parents picked me up from camp, and my eyes were still puffy from all the tearful goodbyes. The only thing making me feel remotely better was the original cast recording of Into the Woods, which we'd already listened to earlier in the trip. As we drove beneath a sign announcing Shaker Heights, 30 miles, I reached across the cup holders to turn up the volume, seeking comfort once again in the musical's opening number, in which classic fairy tale characters sing about what they want. I wish, more than anything, more than life, more than jewels, I wish. My dad reached for the volume dial and cranked it back to the left, abruptly silencing the music. "I'm sorry. Is it just me, or do all these songs sound the same?" he asked, gesturing at the stereo. I gave him my most disdainful look. No one at camp would have ever asked such a question. "They do not all sound the same," I sighed. How could my own dad not hear what made Into the Woods amazing? He only heard repetition, while I heard wit, anticipation, and hope. I had listened to the original cast album hundreds of times, and there were still parts of it I had a hard time singing along to. Stephen Sondheim, my favorite lyricist-composer, was like a magician with music. You know when you're listening to a song and you think you know how the tune's going to go? It wasn't like that in a Sondheim song. He tricked you. But the genius part of it was that the unexpected still felt right. "Come on," Dad teased. "Into the woods and out of the woods and back to the woods and out of the woods again." "That's not what it sounds like." It was obvious that we were nearing the end of our drive home because my mood was going from mopey to downright cranky. "You just don't appreciate the complexity of Sondheim," I muttered. Dad looked at me, eyebrows raised. I could tell my big words had impressed, or at least surprised him. Still, he wasn't about to give in. "I appreciate the complexity of a turbine engine," Dad said with a smirk. "That is complexity worth appreciating. This Sondheim stuff sounds like a record skipping." "It does not." I made a dramatic sound of disgust. Dad laughed. From the back seat, there was a rustle of newspaper as my mom chimed in. "Lou, don't listen to your father. He doesn't know what he's talking about." "You don't think I know how a turbine engine works?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it," Mom said, swatting Dad's arm. I twisted around in my seat, grateful for an ally in defending my beloved show. "Thank you, Mom." She winked at me. Mom preferred to ride in the back seat on long car rides so she could spread all the sections of the New York Times across her lap. After 4.5 hours, she'd exhausted all her favorites and was now reading the automobiles section, which I knew did not interest her. I'm sure she was happy for a momentary distraction, even if it was to act as referee between me and Dad. "Well, that's what it sounds like to me," Dad said, a little grumbly. "You really don't like it?" I asked him, baffled. The opening number to Into the Woods was one of the most amazing, most epic pieces of music I'd ever heard. "I like Sheryl Crow better." Okay, he had his taste, I had mine. "Can we just finish listening to the opening number?" I pleaded. "I think that's fair, don't you, Doug?" Mom asked, the automobiles section obscuring her face. "Fine," Dad sighed, clearly outnumbered. "Lou wins. But when it's over, we're switching to Sheryl." "Deal," I said, and returned the volume to its earlier level. Listening intently to Cinderella wish for an invitation to the prince's ball, the baker and his wife for a child, and Jack for his cow to give milk, I wanted, more than anything, to add my own voice to the recording. I wish camp had lasted forever. In reality, it had only lasted a week. Still, it had made quite the impression. Camp Curtain Up, CCU for short, was designed specifically for people who loved musical theater, meaning it was designed specifically for me. I had been bugging my parents for 2 years to let me go, and that summer they had finally agreed, putting money aside and driving across Michigan to drop me off at a place that could only be described as paradise. Tucked away in the woods by a beautiful lake, CCU offered an intense week of musical theater training, scene studies, song interpretation, voice and acting technique, tap, jazz, basically everything I wanted to do all the time. But the best part of CCU was that it was the first and only place I'd ever been where every single person was exactly like me. We were all musical theater nerds, MTNs for short. We wore this title with pride at CCU, where for one perfect week, obsessing over how high Idina Menzel belted in Wicked was not only acceptable, it was encouraged. We could debate endlessly about whether the original cast recording of the last 5 years was better than the movie cast recording. It was. And no one looked at us as if we were weird. We didn't have to convince one another that Into the Woods was sacred. Everyone at CCU knew that it was. It's not like I didn't have friends at home. I did. But no one appreciated the things I was passionate about, certainly not with the same intensity. Even my closest friend, Jenny, who'd been taking ballet since she was 5, kind of zoned out if I went on for too long about Kristen Chenoweth's impeccable comic timing. There were the Shaker Heights community players who had cast me as Amaryllis in their production of The Music Man last fall, but they were all much older than me. Even the role of Winthrop, the little boy who sings Gary Indiana, had been given to Amy Judd, a petite 15-year-old girl with short hair. I'd had a lot of fun doing the show with the players, but I didn't really consider any of them my friends. It's not like I would have invited any of them over to hang out at my house. Though Amy Judd did babysit me once when my parents went out for their anniversary. Besides, the musical they'd chosen to do this fall was Chess, and there were definitely no roles for kids my age. I wish I was snapped to attention by the crystal-clear voice of Little Red Riding Hood, played by Danielle Furland. My parents were discussing what to do for dinner, and I shushed them. Just till this part's over, I said, please. And then I couldn't help but sing along. It's not for me, it's for my granny in the woods. A loaf of bread, please. Having listened to the album so many times, I knew every word, every inflection, every breath that Danielle Furland took, and I made sure to match her as best I could. You really do sound just like her, Lulu, my mom said once the solo was finished. I know moms have to say stuff like that, but I still loved being compared to Danielle Furland. Little Red Riding Hood was my dream role. We have similar vocal placement, I said, using a singing term I'd learned at camp. Mom leaned forward and looked at me as she rested her head against the driver's seat. You know, Lou, I've said this to you before, but you are very lucky that you figured out so early in life what you love to do. It'll be challenging for sure, but some people spend their whole lives searching for something they're passionate about. You're only 12 years old and already set. Yeah, I said, looking out the window. I wanted Mom's words to make me feel better, especially since I knew how much she meant them. She hadn't figured out what she wanted to do until a couple years ago, and was now, at age 39, about to start her 3rd semester studying psychology as a part-time student at Cleveland State Community College. All the same, a wave of self-pity washed over me as we passed a Shaker Heights 20 miles sign. Having just said goodbye to a bunch of people who loved the same things that I did, I felt incredibly lonely as I pictured myself back in my normal life. I'd looked forward to camp for so long, and now that it was over, I had nothing to look forward to except 7th grade. Blech. And home before dark. The prologue to Into the Woods was over. And true to my word, I switched out my iPod for Dad's, scrolled down the artist list to Sheryl Crow, and seconds later we were all listening to her proclaim that she just wanted to soak up the sun. Dad sighed with contentment. Mom reached from the back seat and patted his shoulder. You're a good father, Doug. Dad took the Northfield exit, signaling the last 10-minute stretch of our journey home. Even though there were still 2 weeks remaining before I would become a 7th grader, it kind of felt like the summer was over. I stared out the window as the increasingly familiar landscape, Thistledown Racino, Heinen's grocery store, and Pearl of the Orient, Dad's favorite Chinese restaurant, turned the past week full of dance combinations, up-tempos, improvisational exercises, and lots of laughter into a dream. The next 2 weeks would be full of new sneakers, haircuts, and figuring out bus schedules. Soon enough, we were taking the right off of the service road into Sussex Meadows, our subdivision, where the Thompson kids were kicking around a soccer ball in the street before their parents called them inside for dinner. "Car!" they yelled and scrambled toward the curb to let us pass. "Dinner," my mom announced, revisiting the subject, "is going to be pizza. I don't feel like cooking after that long drive." "No argument here," said Dad. "How about you, Lou?" "Pizza's fine," I murmured, suddenly distracted by the large U-Haul parked in the driveway 2 houses down from ours. As Dad pulled into our driveway, I watched a woman about Mom's age carry a crate of glass canisters holding what looked like sawdust up the walkway and disappear through the front door. Moments later, she reappeared, followed by a kid who looked about my age. He was short with a cool haircut. He seemed about as interested in unpacking the U-Haul as I was in unpacking our Subaru. "Looks like the new neighbors have arrived," said Mom, gathering up her newspaper. "We'll have to do introductions at a time when we haven't all been sitting in cars for half the day." "Are you saying I smell bad, Hannah?" Dad said, shutting off the ignition. He got out of the car and made grunting noises as he stretched. Mom wasted no time grabbing as many of my bags as she could carry and headed toward the house. She hated clutter, which meant that the suitcases and duffel bags were usually emptied and stored in the basement within the first 30 minutes of our return. I was ready to help maintain Mom's record, but as I emerged from the passenger side, I was caught off guard by the new kid's t-shirt, which read very clearly, "Mary Poppins." I recognized the logo from the Broadway playbill Jenny had brought me after her family saw the show in New York. Was my new neighbor an MTN?